A good place to start would be to explain about my friend Doug, who was working as an installer repairman for the phone company, and I was working the number 5 crossbar at that time. Anyway, Doug was a real character, and he would do things like this. Another central office guy was working on a XY office, and they're very noisy, by the way, so it's very easy for somebody to walk in, and if you're concentrating on something, you wouldn't really notice it because the office is very noisy. Anyway, Jim is the CO guy here. He was working on a problem using a test lamp, and we have positive ground and a negative 48 volts in the office. So Jim had it set up for what he wanted to look for. Let's say he was looking for ground, he'd put it on battery, minus 48 volts. Or if he was looking for battery, he'd put it on ground, so the light would light when he ran across ground. Well, Doug, of course, knew whose truck it was, and he snuck in there and saw what he was doing, so when Jim wasn't looking, he would switch. If it was on ground, he'd switch it to battery and let Jim do some testing and start possibly talking in colorful languages, and when he wasn't looking, he'd switch it back. So it didn't take too long after that if you knew that Doug was around, you just stopped working. And another short story about Doug is one morning he comes walking into the crossbar office that I was working at, walking very, very carefully. And he had scratches and a few bruises on his face, and it was real evident that he had more bruises and scratches elsewhere. Well, what had happened is the night before, and evidently it was no moon, a very dark night, he had to leave a residence rather quickly, and he ran into an empty swimming pool. Well, one Saturday morning, Doug calls me and tells me that they've got a problem at the Millstadt Creamery. And of course, I was much younger then, and this was a Saturday morning, and basically I didn't want to be bothered, and also chances are my head was hurting. And of course, it was Doug calling. So I asked him, okay, well, what's the problem? He says, every time they operate the cash register, a few seconds later, the phone rings and there's nobody there. And of course, I go, oh, Doug, leave me alone. It's Saturday morning. Well, he tells me that he got permission from his boss to call me out. And of course, I'm still not really quite believing this. Operate a cash register and the phone rings. So I go down to the creamery and walk in, and there's a few customers there. They're about ready to make a sale, and I'm just watching, and he operates the cash register, and sure enough, a couple of seconds later, the phone rings, and there's nobody there. So we did this a few more times, and the phone looked normal, just regular phone wire up to it. But the cash register was a very large electrical, mechanical, filled with relays and solenoid type register. I had no idea what this might have to do with the problem, but I go, well, we'll trace the power source of this and see what we find. Because I figured, well, there's a lot of spikes being generated from that register. And sure enough, when I trace it back, that phone that was out in the lobby was an FX line, which I didn't know, which means a foreign exchange line. And what that also means is that the ringing is supplied by the equipment at the creamery. And it happened to be Tellabs equipment. So I went ahead and went out to my office and picked up a few cards. I thought it would probably be getting in through the power. So I changed out the power card first, and sure enough, that cleared up the problem. But this was the weirdest problem that I had seen in a while, operating the cash register, and then a few seconds later the phone rings. Thanks for listening.